going to discuss this further with Hussam Zomlot, head of the Palestinian mission to the UK, who is currently in the West Bank. Once again, we're seeing attacks. Once again, we're seeing people being killed, children in this situation. What do you say? What do you call on the international community to try and broker a ceasefire? What do you need to see happening?
Thank you, Kasha. To start with the BBC reporting, I just heard your report talking about Israeli citizens hiding in shelters. And to tell the world that the Palestinians in Gaza have no shelters, have nowhere to go. They have been under a draconian blockade for the last 16 years. They have been bombarded every once in a while. This is not the first war of Israel, an aggression of Israel against Gaza, against the Palestinian people. Let me remind everyone that it started here in the West Bank by arresting political leaders, killing, maiming many youth and children here in the West Bank. Then they moved to Gaza. It's a flagrant act of aggression, a war of Israel's choice. It was completely unprovoked under the pretext that they have information that somebody is thinking about something, and then they go and bombard an entire city. You have seen the images of residential compounds. 6 children have been slaughtered yesterday, more than 32 Palestinian civilians. No Israeli have been hurt, and therefore we start with the reporting. This whole thing about violence between Palestinians and Israelis, violence and conflict between Gaza and Israel is absolutely misguided and misleading. What we call on the international community is very clear. This aggression must end. Israel's blockade of Gaza and occupation must end. Israel's colonial policy in the West Bank and settlement expansion must end. International law must be applied. International duplicity and double standards in comparison to the position regarding Ukraine, it's absolutely mind-boggling. This is an occupation. The world recognizes Israel's presence in Palestinian territory as an illegal military occupation. The world recognizes that the acts of colonial expansion is illegal. The world recognizes East Jerusalem is an occupied city. And as we speak, Kash, as we speak, thousands of Israeli illegal settlers have stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque and are exercising religious rituals allowed by an Israeli caretaker government who are using Palestinian blood as we speak to compete in the internal Israeli politics. As you know, elections is imminent in a couple of months' time, and therefore every Israeli politician now wants to show for the Israeli public that they have more blood on their hands. This is what Israel is producing, and given the complicity and the complacency of the international community, Israel simply can do it and can keep doing it and can repeating the same war crimes, the same crimes against humanity. International law is clear. The commitments and responsibilities of the international actors, including the UK. When we hear from the United Kingdom Foreign Secretary that Israel has the right to defend itself, and when we hear that terrorism is what is at stake with Israel here, then we know that the UK government is giving a green light to the Israeli government and army to do what you have just reported. When we hear the American side saying that we fully back Israel in everything it does, and when you compare it to the situation in Ukraine and elsewhere, then you know that the international community is absolutely responsible since this whole thing started more than 104 years ago, the Balfour Declaration, the colonial legacy of Britain. Then you know that Israel is doing all that because it knows that it has impunity.
I'm going to just interrupt because, yes, I appreciate the background, the history to which you're speaking about. But when we talk about, when Israel is talking about these threats that it is concerned about from Islamic Jihad, it is talking about targeting tunnels created by Islamic Jihad. I wonder if you can just explain to us the kind of intel that Israel potentially could have and why it has these concerns.
What intel? What intel? Did you report any Israeli being harmed or killed? But you always report tens of Palestinians, primarily children, women, families, entire families being wiped out. Not this time only, every time. Last year in May, the year in 2014, every occasion, it's the Palestinians who get killed. And what information? Even if you have information, you go and you commit extrajudicial killing at your will, and you get the support of the US. Israel is the 4th strongest army on earth. It's a nuclear power. It has the Iron Dome by America that can intercept any rocket. And Israel is absolutely protected. The only people that are not protected is the people in Palestine, in the West Bank, Gaza, in Jerusalem, everywhere. And let me say this, Kasha, very clearly. This is an illegal occupation, and the people of Palestine have the right to defend themselves, defend their children and families, have the right to resist the illegality. So having an information, then you go and you devastate an entire city that is the most condensed, the most poor, the highest unemployment on earth, that is besieged by the air and the sea and the borders, I mean the land. And then every other month you go and bombard them because you have information. This is not international law. This is absolutely the rule of the jungle. This is thuggery. Israel is becoming the thug of the world, and it is allowed to be a thug of the world because of the blind, blatant support of the international actors, including the United States and the UK, primarily the United States. When I see, Kasha, when I see the statement of the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, yesterday, condemning the Palestinian violence and not having the guts to only condemn the violence against us, the babies, the children, then I know where to point the blame to.
Hussam Zamlot, head of the Palestinian mission to the UK, all points that we will have to put to the other parties. Thank you very much for speaking to us, though, for the time being.